business. My mom taught me to sell at a spaza shop. She ran a hair salon. I pretty much learned entrepreneurship from my mom's.
Ngumntu ngabantu. That on your own, you can't really do it. You need the support of those around you.
You will have a network of people, a network of communities, and a society that will make sure that you count.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of SAITA StraightTalk. The SAITA StraightTalk discussion series is powered by SAITA, the South African Informal Traders Alliance, the official voice of the informal sector in South Africa that endeavors itself to have one sector and one voice. Every week or every Tuesday and Thursday evenings, particularly, we endeavor to talk about the hard issues that affect the informal trading sector. A couple of weeks ago, we started our conversation around the BBBEE Codes, what it means to business and what it means to the informal sector. Tonight, we have with us again Brad Fisher. We are expecting the Acting Chief Director of the Department Trade Industry and Competition to join us. So as soon as he's available, he will jump on. But in the meantime, Brad, good evening.
Good evening, Lisa.
For the sake of our viewers, won't you please just introduce yourself and give us a little bit of a background of who you are and where you come from?
Evening. Thanks, Louisa. My background is in what's today known as a shared value business, which is a business for profit that at the same time drives development. We started all the years ago with a project called Adopt a Light, which was a principle where we would say to companies in areas like Sandton, if they wanted to have branding on street lights up in Sandton, they would have to put up street lights in areas like Alex. The idea being leveraging off infrastructure that exists in part of our country to put up infrastructure in neighboring areas that didn't have infrastructure. And the idea being that business would drive this, which proved to be the case. So we would, in fact, charge big business more than it cost us to put up the street lights in the different areas. This went on to various other projects, adopter projects, which we called them. The waste pickers was the next area that we tackled, which are these informal waste, what we call them wastepreneurs, helping these guys and girls that collect waste and painstakingly separate out the waste that it doesn't get into landfills and mess up our environment, and get really bottom dollar for their bottom rand for their huge value that they add. And it's how if you organize these guys into groups and you get better buying power because you've got critical mass, and you put sites where these people operate so they don't have to walk for miles pulling the trolley, you give them a better chance of making a living. And then we went on to trying to understand what was the missing ingredient. You can make little bits of a difference like the wastepreneurs, like socioeconomic development initiatives, but to really make big impact in this country, what's the key thing? And the answer really is to make sure that the corporate sector, that the powerful formal economy, most importantly, buys from, procures, supports, gives support for services to micro and informal business. If you don't do that, you will always have this massive divide between the formal sector, in fact, even getting stronger over a period like COVID, versus the informal sector, which sadly seems to always take the brunt of the difficulty. If you cannot get the corporate sector buying from the small business, from the informal sector, which you represent, or micro business, whatever you want to define it as, you'll always be limited in terms of closing this gap. And the topic of tonight is how can we use what's really got some good elements, the BBBEE code, but how can we tighten up on that code to make sure that some of the money finds its way to procuring from the micro sector? Because we all know this multiplier effect. If you can get businesses in Sandton procuring services from businesses in Alex, that money stays in Alex and it multiplies into that local business community. Same thing in Cape Town, same thing around the rest of the country. But how do you get the corporates to do such a thing? If you and I got hold of the procurement officer for Bidvest, which is a big company, or Absa Bank, doesn't matter, I'm not trying to pinpoint anyone, and ask them, why aren't you buying from the informal sector? They'll tell you it's too difficult. They've got to spend billions. They'll tell you their scorecard is fine. They buy from companies that have got good scorecard ratings. But when you ask them the question, yes, we understand, but we see that you spend none of your billions, zero, on the informal sector, the real answer will be twofold. One is, it's just not practical for a big corporate to buy from micro, and there are ways around that. And the second thing is, compliance doesn't require them to do it. It's too much like hard work, and somehow that part of the codes needs tightening up, that they are forced, and no one's unrealistic. You cannot say on day one they must spend 70% of their services with the informal sector because it'll kill the economy. We're not saying that. We're saying certainly on day one we want to see a certain percentage, and 6 months later more percentage, and 2 years later more percentage. So eventually we can get to a point 3 to 5 years from now where formal sector is buying services from informal sector. And that, I believe, will make all the difference to this country in terms of closing the gap.
You know, Brad, when I speak to people about a triple BBBEE codes, just in general, I'm not even talking about people that are specialists in the area. There's a lot of emotion that is always invoked when those letters come up in a conversation. Now, I want to go back to the definition of the broad-based Black economic empowerment, or the triple BBBEE codes, as we call it. So the definition says it's a program that provides a legislative framework for the transformation of South Africa's economy and aims to advance economic transformation and enhance the economic participation of Black people in the South African economy. Mm-hmm. And what you are saying here is that the triple BBBEE codes has an intent to on an economic level, right certain wrongs. But the parameters within which it is written still excludes the majority of the people that should be set right.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that you put it perfectly. It's spot on.
So I mean, I don't know, the acting chief director hasn't yet let us know that he's having technical difficulties. So the two of us will continue this conversation until he joins. So I'd like to put it to you that the informal sector, with regards to the triple BBBEE codes, could be the first sector that is going to be able to qualify all people economically if given a chance by legislation.
Absolutely. Should be. Not could be, should be the priority of corporate South Africa to assist, because let's call a spade a spade. The reason why we do need to address transformation is things were structured very fairly based on race, in the old days, based on race, against the informal sector. They had to work away from the business sector. The economy was structurally designed in a way that excluded those people. So now you've rightfully so put in a code to address this, which must be in place. But the sad part of it is what's happened is people and South Africans are entrepreneurial. So I'm not saying they're necessarily bad for doing this, but what you found happening is fronting going on. So what do I mean by that? There are elements of the code that says you must spend money with businesses that are 51% Black owned. And in simple terms, if those businesses are below 50 million rand turnover, they are defined as, here we go.
That's so good to see you.
Yes, I was on the link that was on top of the page. I'm realizing that I cannot enter. You are not in that. I just went down on the page. Yes.
Well, Livo, we are live on the SAITA StraightTalk program. Good evening and very, very warm welcome. Brad, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm going to give I'm going to give Livo 30 seconds to just greet our audience and to just introduce yourself and give us a background of who you are and what you do.
My name is Sullivan Mukiti, the current acting chief director of BBBEE at the TTIC. Yes, we are responsible for empowerment, if that's what you want, from empowerment broadly, with the BE Act being we are the custodians of that act at the TTIC. Yes.
Okay, so Livo, just before you joined, Brad, we in SAITA has started the conversation about the BBBEE codes in a previous session, and we were talking about the relevance that it has to the informal sector and how, by virtue of it being structured to assist in righting some wrongs, it is also excluding a huge part of the economy, albeit informal. Because arguably, we're saying that the informal sector is probably the largest employer in South Africa in terms of the number of people. So I'm going to say to you, do you, or where within the codes do you see the advantages for informal traders to get in terms of getting into the system and getting work from bigger and larger enterprises?
I think firstly, we need to then say that what is the function of the DTIC against other functions that actually have instruments that are intended to support informal traders, the saloons and others, home-based businesses. I think it will be unfair really to expect this instrument of empowerment to be, through its elements, to be able to have an uptake at the lowest level of the economy, because in terms of function, that aspect find expression within what the funding mechanisms within your Department of Small Business Development. There's an instrument, by the way, called a TRAP, which is a Township Rural Enterprise Program. That actually is an instrument that cuts across the sectors that you find in the informal trading space, to give them that kick in the back that will enable them to start to formalize. After formalizing through that support, whether they own salons or they do shisanyamas or they sell flowers in the streets, through that instrument, with this threshold starting from about 2,000 rand, by the way, those people will grow and become ready for BE, particularly on the element of enterprise and supplier development. They will be ready by then because they would have been prepared in that function. And with BE, through its coverage across the 5 elements, that's where it comes in and then says that how do we help these businesses that have been formalized through registration, being subjected to training, whether through SIFA itself, Small Enterprise Funding Agency, or SIDA itself, which is a Small Enterprise Development Agency, and the Department of Small Business Development. By that time, they'll be ready, by the way, to become beneficiaries of the element of enterprise development and supply development, and but also become part of the preferential procurement that mainstream businesses are prepared to take on board. As it is that connectivity that gives BBBEE particularly on the elements of enterprise and supply development and preferential procurement. That is where ultimately that uptake comes in. Because ultimately, what we seek is economic redistribution, but we say that there must be instruments on the ground that enable businesses such as informal traders to grow to a point of formalization. And from that point, then mainstream businesses will be prepared to put them as part of their suppliers, but also to train them in enterprise development. Because don't forget, if you look at the enterprise and supply development, it will say to a business that contributes to BE, set aside about 3% net profit after tax. About 2% of that goes to supplier development. About 1% goes to
Enterprise ability.
enterprise development, and overall, you'll have that preferential procurement that your mainstream businesses will have to be ready to have an uptake of those. Because, by the way, some of us have been informal traders. For the better part of our youth years, I was selling in Alexandra, Pan Africa, selling everything. But we knew, myself and my brother, that it will take us to formalize as we grow, because you make a bit of money out of there, so that ultimately that business becomes part of the mainstream. Thank you, Luis.
Thank you, Levo. Brad, you want to respond? I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, sir. Let me put it to you another way. You and your brother obviously got to a certain level of success where you said that big businesses would then potentially be prepared and you could rely on the code to support you. I put something else to the DTI to consider. At the moment, an exempt micro enterprise is defined as a business that's doing less than 10 million rand turnover per annum. And a qualifying enterprise, the QF, is a business doing less than 50 million rand turnover a year. Those categories are way, way, way too high. We haven't got time to wait for, and you might have been an exceptional performing business and have exceptional attributes, but there are millions of people out there that won't get a chance to get to the next stage. Why not simply take your codes and introduce 2 new categories, particularly on procurement? One, a category called Informal Sector, any business that's doing less than, let's say, 100,000 to 200,000 turnover a year max, and maybe a second category called micro enterprise, which is a business that's doing a micro business, which is a business that's doing, say, less than 1 million, at the most 2 million rand turnover. And then force corporates on their 3% net profits they've got to spend on enterprise supply development and enterprise development, force them to spend a certain amount right at the bottom and give them bonus points for doing it. And then more importantly, both are important, but more importantly, it's too easy for the companies, the corporate South Africa, with respect to procurement, not to spend 1 cent on the micro trader like you and your brother were and get level 1 scorecard. I'm involved in a situation like that. I've got a level 1. I happen to do it from a different perspective because I believe it's the right thing to do, but I don't have to do it. Until we make it, and I'm not being unrealistic, you can't say that on procurement, 60% next year has got to get spent by corporate South Africa on micro. You'll kill the economy. I accept that. And at your level, you've got to be putting in responsible policy. But you could graduate it. You could say, from next year, we want to see 5% of corporate South Africa spend money on those 2 categories. Informal sector, which is the smallest of the small, and micro business. The following 6 months, we want to see that jump to 5%. The following year, 10%. If you could get 30, 40% of corporate South Africa spending money on the informal sector through platforms. You know, when you and your brother were running your business, maybe there weren't platforms around. It's much easier now because platforms like an Uber platform, Sweepsoft, Bolt, Loaded, these platforms, there's no excuse for corporates anymore. There's no reason why First National Bank cannot, instead of spending their money with Imperial Logistics or Avis, cannot spend their money with Loaded, which is a South African app with small South African truck drivers. No excuse. So there is stuff that's helped corporates, which are these platforms. If you guys could help the corporates on their way with stricter compliance, we can turn the dial. I hear everything you're saying. Once the business gets up to a certain level, they get caught up in the codes. Absolutely. Once you're doing around about 10 million rand turnover and below, there is support. I can't argue with you. My heart goes out to the small person that during COVID, and it showed us so much in COVID. We actually, it's not about what we did, but we ended up running relief programs and crowdfunding assistance to the informal sector. There was no food relief. There was no grant relief. It's just like an unseen 2-3 million traders. I challenge you to give me one school taxi driver business, one small tuck shop person, one small car guard, waste picker, Uber driver. Show me one person that got any relief during COVID. When you speak to the people responsible for giving that relief out, they didn't do a bad thing. They put that 500 million SASME fund into micro enterprise as defined by the codes, into businesses doing less than 10 million and less than 50 million. They saved thousands of jobs. I don't decry them of that. They did. They should have been forced to put some of the money into micro. It needs to be seen, and it needs to be in a category on the scorecard. And I can't. I've lived this thing. I know what I'm talking about. And when you take the corporates, when you take these big guys into Alex, and you say, "Hey guys, can you see across the way there what wealth there is in there? Can you see how hard people are trying here? They're repairing the car in the middle of the road. Please believe me, these people can repair the car, the computer, the cell phone better than the people doing it for you at the moment, more efficiently. Why aren't you giving them support? There's two reasons. They don't have to. And until you get these people up to a certain level of compliance, I accept it, with training and onto a platform, it's not practical. We can take care of the second problem, which is putting them onto like an IT support platform or a vehicle maintenance platform. If you guys could come in and change the law to force these big corporates that they must spend some of their money, at least some of their money, and more as time goes on the informal sector, then I don't see how South Africa can be a great country. It's just not fair. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. We have to address this critical thing.
So, Levo, as you can hear, Brad is exceptionally passionate. As an informal trader myself, I'm also sitting and I'm thinking, gosh, it's a good thing I was born with a darker skin color, because really that's the only thing that triple BEE is sort of assisting me. But I'm going to have work very hard for a very, very long time to be able to qualify within the parameters that the codes are setting at the moment. So do you think that there is a possibility, because we know we love the idea of TREP and we understand TREP. We also understand the recommendation R204 that was recommended in 2015 by the International Labour Organization, and SAITA, as the voice of the informal sector, is working very, very hard in order to make sure that all of our members, and thus all informal traders that are aligned to us as the voice of the sector, moves from that informal state into the formal, because we know that there's benefit in it. It's not all doom and gloom, for SARS to know that you're trading. So we understand that. However, based on the neglect through a lot of legislation, the informal trading sector is lagging behind on a lot of things. And changing these BEE codes, or just introducing some of it, might bring about a movement that would be a lot quicker, because I'm sure in every province there are informal traders that can assist big corporates just through procurement, and that could double their turnover for the year. Is that something that has ever been discussed, or is there room and an appetite and a political willingness for you and your department to consider something like that?
You'll recall that historically, we were one with Department of Small Business, which was much easier to to have that pipeline that will start from the lowest level. You remember we had your BBSDPs before as instruments of financing. It was easier because it was within a one big animal that will start at the lowest level and see an enterprise grow to levels that Brad was referring to, your qualifying small enterprises and the emerging medium enterprises, those thresholds. It was like that. I think one thing that I'm picking up of this discussion is how do we make sure that all available instruments have got that coordination and a relationship, so that when you get supported through Department of Small Business, you don't get lost within the small business space for the longest time. Uh, um, you at least are able to see yourself uh, getting to a point where when you formalized, you pay your taxes, you thoroughly registered, and all your operational system is such that it enables you to take advantage of what Brad was raising, of what the corporates will offer. Um, that discussion actually enriches what government should be considering, in that how do we make sure that this huge employer, which is the informal trading, from a point where they are given a support of 2,000 rand, they are able to then within that pipeline graduate to a particular threshold, because the detail around the threshold is another discussion that we'll have. For example,
Correct.
it's another. For example, you would recall that in 2015-16, when engagement started around the creation of black industrialists,
Yeah.
that triggered another discussion of saying that can't we have baby black industrialists? You understand? Baby industrialists are actually speaking to. I always say that when you go to some industrial park in Athlone
Yeah.
or there in Alexandra, it's someone whose annual turnover might be between a 100,000 to a 500,000 and a million. It's got that small space that is a workshop, but that person should then be able to grow from that point of that small industrial area in that township, uh, to be able to actually access bigger space but with business. But how do we also make sure that there's an uptake, Brad? You'd know that BE in itself has got other instruments such as your equity equivalent investment program. Um, I think it's a low hanging fruit. It's a low hanging fruit with an uptake of companies participating in that who are in the automotives, for example. Ne?
Yeah.
Yeah, funny you
Yes,
say that
ne?
because you got the Toyotas of the world.
You
I'm not
understand?
sure that everyone understands equity equivalence, but Louisa, you got the Toyotas of the world. We were actually speaking to Bolt and Uber top guys in this last week, and when you see the trouble they go to get around, and I will say get around to get around the spirit of the codes, because there are equity equivalence programs, which means the government accepts that Toyota is not going to necessarily give ownership to black South Africans of Toyota. Okay, so the government smartly has said, but then you must go on to equity equivalence programs where we've got proper leverage on these guys. But the problem again is they don't force these guys to think right down, to think small. So, for example, Uber doesn't even need to worry. I'm sorry to bring in names, but I will. Uber doesn't even need to worry about, you say to Uber, do you realize that with your 20,000 drivers, you could aggregate and get the insurance half price? They don't even have to worry about it because they don't have to worry about micro. They can just put their money into other things and get the box ticked, which is cheaper and easier for them. And then they'll give you the argument, oh, we're a technology provider, we don't do more. Of course you don't do more because you should have the right ethos. Unfortunately, you don't. And we need to make you have the right ethos to change the law. So there are equity equivalence programs, and they are powerful and they do make sense. But we have to introduce the aspect of micro trader and even lower informal sector, below 100,000, maybe 200,000 turnover a year. Otherwise, they get missed. So when you speak to Toyota, and they're putting in all their efforts as we speak, they did the YES program, they're battling now for the uptake, they're applying their minds. How can they get the enterprise development points? How are they going to spend 6% on their payroll in skills development? How are they going to get their procurement right? They don't have to worry about micro. And that is the beginning of a massive problem. So I hear everything, and there are good programs. And there are South Africans and South African companies that have embraced triple BEE. And it's becoming more of a national, my view, national poverty upliftment thing. You can take the race out of it. Unfortunately, 95% of the people in that category happen to be black people. But there are people that are micro that need the support desperately. And these big corporates, I'm sorry to say, they talk about it. They all talk about it. The banks will tell you they want to bank the unbanked. They will tell you the only way forward in this country is to include the unseen economy. But then when you say to them, well, what are you doing about it? They say, well, we got a good scorecard. We're doing lots. No. What are you doing about lending money, interest-free like you have to businesses under 50 million, lending money to our acting chief here and his brother when they are that size to a decent size? They do zero. They say it's too difficult. They don't know how to do it. They don't know how to assess the risk. Well, you start by saying they have to. And they don't have to do 50% on year one. They must do something. And then more and more and more. So that the smallest of the small have access to capital. Because if you are under 50 million, me and you, Louisa, and the minister and the acting chief here, we can go into a business tomorrow, okay? We can get a fat bank loan, the three of us. I'll own 49%, and you two can own the majority. I happen to be white. You guys happen to qualify, and our business is likely to do under 50 million turnover. And guess what? I can take us into the right guys at F&B. I'm pretty sure I can get us a non-interest bearing loan, maybe even some grant money, 7-year repayments. I bet you. But now we try and do this thing to get 100 small people looked after. No chance. We have to change the game. I can't emphasize it enough. It's staring at us.
Brad, I think the richness of the discussion we're having, actually, particularly with this platform by SAITA, I think it also takes us to bringing closer, that's the small business development department, bringing them closer so that this discussion, at the angle to which we're having it, they get to also hear what the market thinks in terms of what they offer, but against other instruments that are existing. Honestly,
the level, I must just say that the Department of Small Business Development has appeared on our show a couple of times. They are a very keen partner to the informal sector at this stage.
Yeah, because you know, for example, the issue is the pipeline and the uptake at another level. The Automotive Investment Transformation Fund, which is now existing after the investment by the automotives, a closer relationship by DSBD, yourselves, us overseeing, a closer relationship would actually bring the street mechanics much closer. Closer to, you understand? We'll bring those ones closer, but also so that they get to understand opportunities and training that comes, because these instruments, as they they are crafted, they are such that it is enterprise, supplier development, skills, training, and research in others. And the convergence of all these players, inclusive of yourself, ne, will bring that awareness to an AITF and saying that here are actually here's your market for training. I'm speaking of backyard mechanics, those ones who are in the business of automotive development or whatever. No? And with that, I think we'll get somewhere. It means that after this session, Louis and Brett, we must be able to interact with AITF, for example, directly, able to interact with Department of Small Business directly, and the funding institutions that are there, whether it's your CIFA and the like. Ne? Why in one space is to create consciousness, firstly to each other on what is available, and secondly arrive at a point, because don't forget your Department of Small Business, your CIFA are the ones who are funding them, but they will then be at a point where there's an opening of their beneficiaries to benefit on this, is because don't forget AITF, it's a product of EIP, Brad, you understand? And it being a product of EIP, it must be able to reach out to those ones that actually should be beneficiaries. That's what I think, colleagues.
So, Louisa, you know, there's some very interesting things here. The government has said to the vehicle industry, unless you guys play ball, we can affect your import tariffs. Basically, all these terms mean, in simple English, so they've put together this big vehicle empowerment fund, a lot, billions in there, right? You've got the government that said to the banks, unless you start lending to small business, we'll change the money, never mind your scorecard. We will change the amount that we charge you, the central bank, on your interest. That's why they say interested, okay? And I told you there's similar things in the clothing sector. If you got these parties around the table and said, listen, because the trouble, you know what it's really going to amount to? The vehicle guys have got to accept genuinely that they're going to go for it, because the truth is they worry. Because here's how you'd have to do it. You'd have to say there are areas like Alex and maybe Kwamashu and Kailisha where there are capable mechanics. I promise you, capable. But they're never going to get a chance. But there's a right to guarantee you'll know this thing, which means, I don't know if that thing's been put into law yet, but there's about to be put into law, which means if you train up a mechanic on the Mercedes course and they happen to live in Kailisha, Mercedes have got to honor that guarantee. That is the beginning of something very powerful. All you next need to do is convince that vehicle empowerment fund to put all of these small people onto an Uber type platform, right? So that Brad Fisher and all the companies I'm involved in, when it's time to service my fleet, I don't go to the local Santon, guy that's earning millions and millions to give him another $500,000. I go to the platform. I look to see I get a better price. I deal directly with the business owner. They are trained. There's plenty of money on skills development in those sectors. They are trained properly, and Merck has to honor the guarantee. It's sitting. Why aren't they pushing it? They worry to be seen to be pushing it because the franchisee, the agent sitting in cargo, in whatever it is, Santon says to Toyota, you better not. So one has to force this thing through. Of course they're going to do that. And of course when Mr. Ramaphosa does a think tank and he puts 10 people in a room, a representative from the auto industry, a representative from the banking thing, they don't tell him everything. They tell him most of it. But they don't tell him actually they're very worried about really pushing this thing, because the whole industry, motor industry, they make a fortune on servicing vehicles. Yeah. Now, what will happen if you allow, because if you do the numbers, 10,000 mechanics in little areas estimated like Alex around the country, that's 1 million people we could start giving work to. Everyone would start using them. Why do people use Uber? People wouldn't get into a taxi before 10 years ago. So if people trusted the platform and they could get their car service cheaper and they were going to get procurement points, you would give these guys a full run for their money. It's actually, I would argue, it's what the competition law requires. You're also head of competition. I hear it's DTI and C now. So actually competition law alone should dictate that we do have to start competing, because these guys have got a monopoly. It's so easy for the guy in Santon, when you buy your car, you buy the maintenance plan. That full maintenance, you buy it up front, the same thing. Every time you take your car in, that one agent gets, I don't know, 100,000 Rand over the next 5 years of that vehicle. If that 100,000 Rand went to 100 mechanics, each getting 1,000 Rand, now you're starting to talk. So we're talking about the multi. I'll give you one last example of where the power of platforms. There's a platform called Money for Jam. 1,000 people that have got, their only skill is they've got a cell phone and they can take an instruction on a phone. That's not 1,000, it's 1 million. 1 million people on the Money for Jam platform. What happens is their only task is when someone wants something, like say after the riots, the SPA wanted to know across the country how many SPAs are affected. Then what Money for Jam will do is they'll put a message out to 1 million of their people, and they'll say the first 50,000 people that respond close to these SPAs can get 500 Rand today by going out, taking a picture of the local SPA, writing a simple report on the state of if it's burnt down or not burnt down. And then once you submit your report back in, you get your $500. So what happened instead? The government used Nielsen's, or I forget, one of the other big market research companies to go and find out. It took them 3 weeks. The report cost $50 million. By the time the report came out, we all knew which SPAs were burnt down. The small guys could have got all that money. There would have been, 50,000 people with 500 Rand. Doesn't sound a lot, but it's a hell of a lot for those 50,000 people. But no corporate even thought like that. Not even the government thinks like that. So everybody should be compelled, and I'm not being unrealistic, with all of your procurement. No, we'll kill the country. No, I don't say that. As time goes on, with more and more of our spend, we should be forced to think small.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that's economic inclusion. That's economic redistribution there.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That's what we advocating for. But as I alluded earlier, maybe having all those players in one space, with the richness of these inputs that I'm getting here, something positive will definitely come out. Particularly considering the disjuncture that you'll find between, as you said, the informal traders, those offer instruments, even at a level of small business, and the journey towards the mainstream. You understand? It is not an easy journey. You write,
Towards the mainstream.
you understand? That journey towards the mainstream, if we connected the dots, avail everything that is on the table, call everyone that will actually give effect to this, pitch these inputs, I think we will build from there. That's what I'm having in my mind, that we'll build from there. It doesn't have to be big, but it starts from somewhere. Everyone who's involved in one space, and yeah, it will take us somewhere. Thanks, Louis.
Thank you, Levo. And it's always good to end a SAITA Straight Talk session with the possibility and the probability that things will start happening from here on. Thank you so much for joining us again. Remember, next week, Tuesday at 7 o'clock, I'll be right back here with the next issue of SAITA Straight Talk. Thank you to our panelists. From me, Louise, till next time, goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Louis. Thanks, Brett. It was nice.